jury or a trial for police to use brutal mortal force against somebody.
Let's turn to Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, a former police officer who co-founded the organization of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. On Saturday, he called on protesters to hold off on future demonstrations out of respect for the slain police officers.
I'm asking all those to hold off on any form of protest until these officers are laid to rest in a peaceful manner. It's time for New Yorkers to come together.
That's now Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, the former police officer who co-founded the organization 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. Graham Weatherspoon, you were a part of that organization. Actually, Sunday night in Harlem, there was a protest against police brutality, but also it served as a vigil for the slain police officers.
Yes, you know, the black community is not anti-police. I think all New Yorkers are pro-police and anti-bad policing. Elliot Spitzer did a report, for instance, on stop and frisk 13 years ago, I believe it was. And he said, as the New York State Attorney General, that the way in which NYPD was doing and utilizing stop and frisk, it was improper. But yet and still, Raymond Kelly persisted with his venue. So should a police commissioner not listen to the Attorney General of the state of New York? And if he will not, what does that convey to the members of the department down the line? Eric and I have worked closely, very closely over the years. I've known him since he was a rookie. But I think the recommendation is truly called for out of respect for the loss of the lives of these two gentlemen, and also keeping in mind Eric Garner and the others. We might need to just woosah, reflect, meditate on what's going on, and just allow the families to move through and transition through this period. It's not going to be easy for them. I know it's when you come to the gravesite, that's the real hard-hitting aspect of it. But I think that we should give the families a chance to just meditate, get themselves together, get the help that they need. As with the families, such as Eric Garner and others who have died over the years, you know, because after the cameras are gone, no one questions what condition the families are in after the funeral. And that's another thing that you might want to look at and write about. The tragedy that goes on post-media, a lot of families. And some I've talked with people suffering with depression, thoughts of suicide, insomnia. It's very horrific what goes on after the person has been laid to rest.
And Steve Thrasher, I wanted to ask you about the, obviously, Mayor de Blasio is now at the low point of his relationship with the police department, and he's, at the same time, he's announced all of these reforms and attempt to change the culture of the department by retraining all police officers with an aim of reducing the number of violent confrontations between police and citizens. Your sense of what this means in terms of any reform efforts by the mayor over in the coming year?
I think that any excuse is going to be used to try to stop reform. We see it in Ferguson, we see it at the Mall of America. Anytime you're inconveniencing people and challenging them to change their way of life, there's going to be friction. And this, of course, is going to cause a lot of friction here in New York City. The mayor came into the office not with a great deal of credibility with the police department as a civilian, and already talking not as pointedly as he has in the past few months, but talking about his son. When he did talk about having the talk with his son, which every black father, including mine, had with me. He's white, but he had it with his mixed-race black son. That caused so much uproar with the police department. It was already obvious that there was going to be a lot of pushback. The thing that is most confusing, and I don't know how to deal with this, is that you do see him and you see the police department enacting certain reforms. I think if you go back a couple of years, we had 700,000 stop and frisks, and this year we should tap out, I think, around 35,000, 40,000 by the end of the month. But at the same time, even though they're down and crime is down at the same time, I believe they're over 80% still of black and Hispanic young men. how do you change that? I mean, that's not simply a matter of doing a different kind of training. That can help a little bit, but that really speaks to sort of the inherent racism and racial profiling that we have in our whole society.
You speak, Stephen Thrasher, about your own experience with police here in New York as a young African American.
I wrote for the first time publicly about my only kind of violent encounter with the police. My father had much more charged interactions with the police than I'd had, but one time I went out running in our summer streets where they open streets up, and when I got to the end of it, I hadn't brought my watch or my phone with me. There were some police officers. I went and asked one of them for the time, and the cop put his hand on his gun, started to pull it out of the holder, saw the look of terror on my face, and then just said, "Ha ha ha ha, just kidding," as if this was a joke to pretend like he was going to pull his gun on me, and then told me the time. And I left, and then I thought about going back to get his badge number, and I'm embarrassed to say I was just too frightened to. I didn't feel like going up and looking at it after this cop had already threatened his gun on me. So that is sort of my most charged experience with the police, and I'm a person who has an education. I have relative access to work and opportunity, and we have a country full of so many people who don't have access to those things.
Your parents' experience with law enforcement, being an interracial couple?
Yeah, my father was in the military. He was black. My mother was white. When they first met, my mother was arrested when they went on a date. She was accused of being a prostitute, and eventually it was illegal for them to get married in the state where they had met, Nebraska. They had to go to Iowa to get married, at which point also a relative tried to arrange for police to stop my mother from leaving the state, but she was able to circumvent them. But my father had especially a lot of very charged interactions with the police. He was a military police officer himself before he became a teacher, but while he was going to night school in California, his base commander would try to keep him from leaving the base to go to college, and pretty much every day when he'd leave, he would get stopped by the same police officers who knew him and worked with him in sort of joint operations between the base and the local police, but they didn't like this uppity Negro trying to get a college education, so they would stop and search him and put him on the hood of his car every day. And I thank God have not had exactly that kind of experience myself, but I heard about from my father. I saw him be pulled over by the police once, which really left a mark on me, and I know that this is something that people go through, and even though I try to diminish my own emotions when I'm in a big crowd of angry pro-cop people, or when a police officer pretends like he's going to pull his gun out on me, it still takes a toll on me, and it takes a toll on all of us.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. Of course, we'll continue to follow this story. Stephen Thrasher is a weekly columnist for The Guardian U.S. His most recent piece, called "Two NYPD Cops Get Killed and Wartime Police Blame the Protesters. Have We Learned Nothing?" We'll link to that at democracynow.org. And Graham Weatherspoon, thanks for joining us again, retired police detective with the New York Police Department, board member of the Amadou Diallo Foundation. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll look at North Korea and the allegations that they hacked into Sony Pictures. Did they? And what about the U.S. relationship with North Korea? Stay with us. Explosions in the sky. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
President Barack Obama has said the U.S. is considering putting North Korea back on its list of terrorism sponsors after the hacking of Sony Pictures. The studio first withdrew, now they say delayed, the release of the screwball comedy film The Interview about a plot to kill North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, following threats against theaters and a hack of corporate data, which officials say was ordered by the North Korean government. Obama was speaking to CNN's Sandy Crowley.
Will you put North Korea back on the list of states that sponsor terrorism, and will you take Cuba off?
We're going to review those through a process that's already in place. We've got very clear criteria as to what it means for a state to sponsor terrorism. And we don't make those judgments just based on the news of the day. We look systematically at what's been done. And based on those facts, we'll make those determinations in the future.
That was CNN's Sandy Crowley, who's leaving CNN. That was her last broadcast. President Obama was speaking to her in that interview that appeared on CNN. North Korea was on the U.S. list of state terrorism sponsors for 2 decades until the White House removed it in 2008 after Pyongyang agreed to full verification of its nuclear sites. Last month's cyber attack was claimed by a group calling itself the Guardians of Peace. The group released the salary and social security numbers of thousands of Sony employees, including celebrities, and also threatened to attack screenings of the film. Last week, theater companies canceled showings of the film starring Seth Rogen and James Franco. This is a clip from the trailer of the interview.
You two are going to be in a room alone with Kim.
We got the interview!
The CIA would love it if you could take him out. Take him out.
Like for drinks? Like to dinner? Take him out in the town?
No, take him out.
You want us to kill the leader of North Korea?
Yes.
What? Hello, North Korea!
Preceding the interview, you will shake Kim's hand with a fatal dose of poison.
A clip from the trailer of Sony Pictures' film The Interview. Although U.S. officials have said North Korea is behind the attack, many experts have questioned whether the evidence is sufficient. Meanwhile, North Korea has denied responsibility for the cyber attack and warned the U.S. against retaliation. According to a statement posted Sunday on North Korea's official Korean Central News Agency, a top defense committee has threatened attacks on, quote, the White House, the Pentagon, and the whole U.S. mainland if the U.S. retaliates. The statement from the National Defense Commission, the country's top policymaking institution, said, quote, the Army and people of the DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, are fully ready to stand in confrontation with the U.S. in all war spaces, including cyber warfare space, to blow up those citadels.
To talk more about this, we're joined by 2 guests. Tim Shurrock, investigative journalist and the author of Spies for Hire, The Secret World of Outsourced Intelligence. Shurrock grew up in South Korea and has been writing about U.S.-Korea relations for 30 years. Joining us via Democracy Now! Video stream, Christine Hong, an assistant professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, executive board member of the Korea Policy Institute. She has spent time in North Korea, including a visit to the country as part of a North American peace delegation. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Christine Hong, let's start with you. Can you talk about the possibility that President Obama will put North Korea back on the terrorism list and the whole controversy around this film, The Interview, that now Sony says they're not actually withdrawing, but they are delaying the release of?
You know, I think that President Obama's interview with CNN was very revealing. He refused to call, this attack, the cyber attack, anything but cyber vandalism. He did not call it an act of war. And I have to wonder if that's not because the United States is one of the most egregious global actors when it comes to cyber warfare. And so, it would definitely be consistent with President Obama's policy to maintain a hard line with regard to North Korea. And by contrast, we see that the United States, with regard to Cuba, has stated that after 5 decades of a failed policy of isolation that was aimed at regime change, the United States has to shift its policy with regard to Cuba, but the same is not true with regard to North Korea. With regard to this film, one thing that I'd say is that the lines between truth and fiction are extraordinarily thin. I mean, the plot of this film, which very few people have seen, was actually screened in rough cut form at the State Department. And the content of this film is supposedly, it's about the CIA using Hollywood